declaration, 11,000 scientists are saying it's far, far worse than we thought. So accelerating faster, climate change is far more severe, and talking about what is it? Kind of untold suffering, kind of like demise of civilization. So it's getting quite serious, and actually it's not just Extinction Rebellion, it's actually lots of scientists and even quite mainstream people are saying the same thing. Okay, how do you do it? How do you do system change? And it's not just system change for a country, is it? Because you need to do a global system change, because you can't just solve the problem in one country and then to tackle the environmental catastrophes. It has to be a global system change. So how can you possibly do that? That seems like an impossible goal. We're going to explain that there is a way of doing it. There's actually a kind of academic study of system change. It's a very nascent field, and they kind of admit they don't really have the answers. It's kind of like a few years old. But we explore existing work on system change. So a recent paper, 2015, would say, yeah, the literature is really frustrating. It talks about the kind of like the need for system change rather than what to do. So this paper from a few years ago, Langley Chase Foundation. So we read through tons of papers, hundreds of papers, books, kind of steering committees, kind of advisory committees, asked all the experts. We'll come up with this 50-page report on how to do system change. Now, it's not frustrating, it's not disappointing, it's basically none of the stuff in this report is wrong. It's just all stuff like you got to map the situation, you got to understand all the actors, you got to get everyone involved or related on board. You've got to work with uncertainty. You've got to do things like delegate power. Now, all these things are not wrong, but there's nothing in that 50-page report you can't find in a book about how to start a small business. There's nothing that a kind of management consultant can't tell you in terms of how to change a system of your company or your corporation or local council. Another paper called Free Horizons. Okay, the Free Horizons are basically the first horizon is the current state. Second horizon is that people want change, and the third horizon is basically where you want to get to. Okay, so the Free Horizons approach is saying, in the paper says we really highlight the need to research the kind of how to do system change. So you've got to research these methods of system change. And then the paper says, but in order to do that, you need to transform, how did it put it? You need to transform the contemporary systems of knowledge production in order to get the answers. Okay, but then at the end of the paper, how do you actually transform the contemporary systems of knowledge production? Well, that's beyond the scope of the paper. So, did I know? So the answer is there if we research for the answer, but to get the answer, we need to transform the contemporary systems of knowledge production, but don't know how to do it. Okay, so it kind of go around in circles. Now, okay, so it's a nascent field, it's just begun, so it's basically, it's trying to do its best to figure out how to do system change. Now, if we quickly go through this, we've investigated the academic study of revolutionary movements. Okay, we get slightly warmer. Okay, so basically, surely revolutionary movements try to do system change. They try to change like governments and stuff. So if we kind of studied a really powerful revolutionary movements, then surely there might be some clue here. Okay, so just like a skimming stone, just get to kind of more original material. Okay, in the Western world, the study of revolutionary movements is split into actually 4 recognized generations. Okay, it's like a skimming stone, just quickly go through this. Now, the first generation, early 20th century, basically investigates the great revolutions, French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, English Civil War, etc. But there's no attempt at theory, it's all descriptive, basically. So this happened, there was that battle, there was this agent, she said, let them eat cake, there was outrage and stuff. So there's no kind of like, unifying theory behind it, no attempt to understand deeply the process of revolutionary movements. And the second generation after the Second World War, 50s and 60s, attempted to be theory-driven, took ideas from sociology, from psychology, from political science, and tried to apply it to understanding revolutionary movements. But it's kind of like castles built on sand, because these kind of like theories from social science themselves weren't grounded. So it was kind of unsatisfactory, which led to a kind of third generation, which was structural and state level, kind of akin to Marxist analysis of revolutionary movements. And many of these scholars in the 70s and 80s and early 90s were actually from a Marxist background. So basically everything is state level. So basically the state went to war with another country, the power elites were weakened, and that gave opportunity for a revolution to occur. Now, the weakness of this approach was it studied the onset of revolutions, but didn't really deal with the process of revolution. Okay. Now, the fourth generation in the late 90s really tried to attempt to unify all the existing ideas from before. And basically, they thought that a unifying theory would emerge by using ideas of ideology, narratives, leadership, cultural frameworks, and gender and networks. But a generation later, to quote one author, the grand synthesis failed to emerge. So yes, there was success, there was kind of like, but the kind of overall grand synthesis failed to emerge. But we believe that there is gold in those hills, and if you dig a little deeper, you will find the answer in where they were looking. Okay, the fifth generation more recently kind of studied the Arab Spring kind of revolutions that don't produce much change. So now many theorists are saying revolutions can't happen anymore because of democracy. Basically, the era of great revolutions is over, some people are saying. Left-wing scholars are kind of lamenting that it's really hard to do. There's a kind of desires for some kind of global movement to emerge, some kind of desires to actually instigate some kind of global revolution, but no one seems to quite know how to do it. Okay. Now, so we look at some kind of leading thinkers and commentators. Okay, so what do they say? Chris Hedges is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. Okay, he kind of American US journalist, studies the iniquities of American society. And he's constantly calling for revolution. He's basically saying that, yeah, we need a revolution. He's saying that basically we're in an interregnum period, quoting Antonio Gramsci. Basically, the old order, the ideas behind the old order, they've lost their power. Basically, neoliberalism, people don't believe the narratives anymore. But he's saying no new narrative has emerged to challenge the existing narrative. And he actually says specifically that unless a new ideological framework emerges to challenge the old ideological framework, he actually says, quote, nothing's going to happen. Okay, yeah, so yeah, it's going to be protests here and there, but they'll come and go. Nothing will fundamentally change. So Chris Hedges. David Harvey is a Marxist scholar, okay, a real kind of hardcore Marxist scholar. But even he says in 28, after the financial crash, he says Marxism doesn't really have the answer. That the answer is going to involve a revolution in mental conceptions. It's kind of like the kind of reform of contemporary systems of knowledge production. It's kind of like echoing the earlier paper from Systems Change Literature. Slavoj Zizek and his pal Frederick Jameson thinks the answer, what's missing, is a cognitive mapping, basically a general view of the situation, where we are now, where we need to be, and how to get there. So he thinks that's what's needed. As to when this cognitive mapping will come, and will the answer come? What's his reply? I believe a miracle might happen. Okay, so, basically, there's a search for the answer, but if someone says a miracle might happen, then it's not apparent to a lot of people that the answer is going to come. Yuval Noah Harari, the best-selling author, says what's most striking to him is that neither the left nor the right can offer a serious, meaningful vision for where humanity can be in 2050 that incorporates environmental collapse, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. Now, if we examine all these things we talked about, I mean, what the general idea is, okay, what they're all saying, they're talking about ideas. They're saying there's a missing idea. They're really talking about the power of ideas and narratives. So this is like a cliche. The power of ideas. The sword is mightier than the pen. Knowledge is power. You can resist an invading army, but you can't resist an idea whose time has come. And in the age of information, internet, mass communications, surely if an idea can emerge to cut through the porn and the fake news and the kind of like, all the kind of like junk on the internet, something potentially might just spread quite quickly over the internet. So the power of ideas, especially in the age of the internet, might be something amplified. Now, power of narratives, okay, Joseph Nye, a US political theorist, is most associated with this idea, but we mentioned some of these names earlier. Now, his big idea was soft power, and his famous phrase was, it's no longer whose army that wins that's important anymore, it's rather it's whose narrative that wins. So again, the power of narratives, ideas, and so it's not a new thing. Okay, the Bible, where there's no vision, the people perish. Proverbs, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. So what is this vision, this knowledge that can somehow change the situation, kind of reverse this imminent ecological, environmental, civilizational collapse? What can it possibly be? Well, there's an idea even more powerful than ideas. It's the idea of worldview. Okay, let me explain what it is. Worldview, or Weltanschauung, is a really controversial word. I'll explain why in a minute. It's a very old idea. It's the idea that the universe exists as a cosmic unity, like an organic unity. It's a very old idea, Platonic, Neoplatonic, ancient. And corresponding to that idea is the notion that basically knowledge, also there's a worldview waiting to be found, whereby all the ideas can click together into an organic unity. So this goes against the kind of postmodern trend that all ideas are relative. No idea is better than another. It's all subjective. It's all kind of relative. It says no, there is an absolute that's waiting to be found. If you can find this absolute, then all the ideas will click together into this organic unity, and that's a really powerful idea, and I'll show you why in a minute. So, if that's worldview or Weltanschauung, then in terms of paradigm shift, what it means is basically, we're not talking about one paradigm, a scientific paradigm or a political paradigm. We're already talking about the master paradigm that contains all the paradigms, legalistic, economic, artistic, religious, etc. So that's the notion of worldview. Can you imagine a worldview actually incorporates all these paradigms? So it's not, if you want a political change, it's not just about changing a political paradigm, because all the paradigms are interconnected. And I'll show why later. So just to skip this, so we get to the kind of more original, kind of beefy stuff. Kind of Mazeway, Anthony Wallace, Canadian anthropologist, same basic idea, kind of all the ideas in the person's head. Knowledge Webb, one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, Quinn, Willard Van Orman Quinn, same idea of knowledge web. And if Zizek talks about a cognitive mapping, we're really talking about the total cognitive map of all ideas in the person's head. Now, the important thing is that this cognitive mapping must incorporate metaphysics and cosmology, because it's really a grand view, some idea of the ultimate. Okay, so it's not really worldview, it's a misnomer, it should be cosmic view. Okay, so that's Weltanschauung or worldview. Now, let me give you an example of the power of worldview. Because a new worldview emerged during the Renaissance, and it totally shook Europe. Okay, well, I'll tell you what the old worldview was. The old worldview, the cosmology was basically, there was a great chain of being. That's what people believed during medieval times. So the great chain of being was, up there was God. Below was the angels and cherubim and seraphim, etc. Now below that was the king and kings of the world. Below that the knights and bishops and popes. And below that the merchants, and below that the serfs, etc., the peasants. And below that animals, and below that termites and cockroaches and stuff. So great chain of being. Now associated with the idea of the great chain of being was the divine right of kings to rule. Okay, now what overturned that cosmology was ideas in the Renaissance, which completely overturned it. Okay, we have Copernicus, of course, Galileo, but we had new ideas about politics, ideas of the philosopher king ruled by a philosophic elect. Plato's Republic was translated, ideas of democracy, tyranny, etc. Suddenly these ideas, this new cosmology and these new ideas of political organization challenged the idea of the divine right of the king to rule. Now, if you think about it, if everyone believed in the divine right of the king to rule, everyone in England in the 16th, 17th century believed that, there is no English Civil War, there's no glorious revolution. You think about it. If everyone believed in that cosmology, divine right of the king to rule, you don't find the soldiers for your new model army. Oliver Cromwell doesn't exist. So that's the power of worldview. So basically, you have to shift the worldview for the English revolutions and the French revolutions and American revolutions to have happened. So that's one example. Now, another example is a very famous philosopher called, can't remember this, Gottfried Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Okay, very famous philosopher. It means a lot of people don't like him because they think his ideas lead to totalitarianism and fascism. It's not true, but I mean, he's actually not widely liked in the Western world. He's a German philosopher. Okay. Now Hegel, he wrote in his early writings, he said basically, before a revolution, there was a secret revolution that occurred, that always has to occur as a prelude to the revolution that is visible. He talked about a secret revolution in the spirit of the age, the zeitgeist. And what he's talking about was a revolution in the realm of ideas. And he said the resultant revolution was astonishing to people because they're unaware of the the secret revolution. Now, in his youth, in his early writings, he basically talked about using the Kantian system, the ideas of Immanuel Kant, to reform all knowledge, to produce a worldview that he hoped in his youth would generate the revolution in Germany. Now, it didn't quite happen, but from that you can see where Hegel's work derived from. Okay, actually, Hegel later on in his life became really conservative because he was appalled by the French Revolution, what happened to Napoleon and his descendants and stuff. And he basically, it was a bit nuts. He basically thought that the Prussian monarchy was the ideal state of governance. So always ideas not necessarily good. But the main thing is basically his work was a worldview that he intended to be revolutionary, and his idea of a secret revolution that preceded the visible revolution. He's really talking about the Renaissance revolution, really, in ideas. Now, the most famous follower of Hegel, is a guy called Karl Marx. So Karl Marx is called a left Hegelian because basically he took Hegel's original left-wing revolutionary way of looking at things and he ran with it. The entire Marxist system is basically adapted Hegelism. That's what it is. So he made it materialistic, he made it atheistic, where it was kind of like spiritual dialectic. He came up with this kind of, like a dialectic materialism. So he kind of adapted Hegel's ideas, added on lots of more economic theory, and that's the Marxist ideology. But it's not just an ideology or kind of like an economic political idea, it's actually an entire worldview derived from Hegel's worldview. The simple fact of the matter is, Karl Marx, working in the British Library, writing, sponging off Engels to stay alive, 70, 80 years after his death, 2/3 of all the people on this planet were living under regimes that called themselves directly, indirectly, explicitly, implicitly Marxist. So what was it about the Marxist worldview that had that kind of power? Another guy who constantly went on and on about worldview, in his speeches, in his book, in his personal interactions. Just goes on and on about Weltanschauung. That guy was Adolf Hitler. In Mein Kampf, pages and pages devoted to worldview, the party with respect to worldview, propaganda, the meaning of the state in respect to worldview, the revolution with respect to worldview. Worldview in his mind was central to the party, the movement. I've got to tread carefully here. My kids are mixed race. I'm an absolute bane of neo-Nazis. So when you start saying, positive things about, or I'm not saying positive things. I'm saying basically. Well, I'm not saying positive things. What the main point is basically how the Nazi Party started. It's not positive things. Basically, historical facts. 7 sad losers, the beginnings of the Nazi. Hitler didn't use those words. In Mein Kampf, he said 7 poor devils. He called them young people, inexperienced, unknown, naive. What hope did they have of transforming the world and Germany? Yet, the beginnings of the Nazi Party, slightly more than 10 years after these 7 poor devils meeting in a shabby back room in the suburb of Munich, took power in Germany. 7, 8 years later, basket case Weimar Republic Germany is on the verge of world domination. What happened? What was it about this worldview? The main point here is basically the power of worldview, and it's not just right-wing or left-wing, but it's also the change in worldview also gave rise to parliamentary democracy, and also, basically the English Civil War and the Enlightenment revolutions, liberal societies, basically. So it's a universal. It's not just about right-wing revolution or left-wing revolution. It's all centered as well. That's an important point. Very, very important. So worldview is really, really powerful, but there's another ingredient, behind Marxism, Nazism, and the Enlightenment revolutions. And this hidden factor is really the key to the global system change, apart from the notion of worldview. So what is that hidden factor? Now, some of this is really small, but I'll explain the gist of this diagram. So basically, the gist of this diagram is, so that is Italian Renaissance. You see, Italian Renaissance, English Renaissance, German Renaissance. So explain it. Basically, Italian Renaissance gave rise to the English Renaissance and the German Renaissance. and then the English Renaissance became the English Enlightenment, and the German Renaissance became the German Enlightenment. Okay. Now here is Hegel. This is a big diagram. This is kind of a progression of several hundred years of European history, and what it's meant to show is basically that all the kind of political isms, liberalism, nationalism, Nazism, traditionalism, they all derive from a common epicenter. That epicenter happened in Florence. Okay, so basically, before that it was the Dark Ages, and you had this Renaissance, this kind of rebirth of this ancient knowledge. Now the critical thing, the critical idea was contained in a book called the Corpus Hermeticum. Okay, obviously Plato's Republic, really one of the most important political books of all time, kind of went into the mix, and obviously the Bible was an important factor, got translated in the common vernacular. Now, the Corpus Hermeticum was believed by the Medici and the people during the Renaissance to contain the most exact version or kind of rendering of the Prisca Theologia, they called it. Now, Prisca Theologia means the ancient religion, or the primal religion, or the unspoilt religion, basically the truth behind religion, they thought. And this Corpus Hermeticum, okay, is actually is the key text behind Freemasonry as well. And in fact, it's a mystical text, it's a mystical book. And Marsilio Ficino, who translated it, and now he saw the parallels between that and the most mystical book of the Bible, St. John Gospel. He actually thought they were by the same author. Actually, Martin Luther thought the same thing. So very, very mystical. Now, the key idea about St. John and Corpus Hermeticum is this notion that somehow, yeah, God is inside you, microcosm is macrocosm, but also contain this idea that somehow we were God, somehow the universe was somehow inside us, that the magus could somehow become unified with God. Now, this is really important because one of the luminaries of the Renaissance, Pico della Mirandola, wrote a book called The Oration on the Dignity of Man. Now, this is a really important book because it's been called a manifesto of the Renaissance. It's been called a manifesto of Renaissance humanism. In it, he quotes Psalm 82:6, "You're all gods." In it, he says the ultimate attainment is that the human being, the spirit of the magus, can become unified with God. But then he says human dignity, man and woman is worthy of reverence. Human dignity rests on this assumption of divinity. And that's really important because it was a key assumption of the Renaissance. Okay, so from this ideas of human dignity, you also had ideas, even atheist philosophers agreed that the ideas of progress, universalism, equality, fraternity really came from religion, even ideas of, like human rights deriving from human dignity. The main point is basically these ideas traveled, and these ideas were fully believed by the luminaries of the English Renaissance. And actually, you can say that these ideas actually gave rise to modern science, because the luminaries of science, Francis Bacon, and the Royal Society has been called the midwife of modern science, the Royal Society based in London. But the Royal Society began as the Invisible College, which was essentially a Freemason meeting group. So again, Freemasonry, esoteric religion, Corpus Hermeticum. Okay, so the main point is basically these notions of human dignity, progress, universalism, equality, liberty, fraternity, all these kind of like values of the Enlightenment and what we call the kind of values of European culture derive from these ideas, essentially religious, mystical ideas from the Renaissance. So what happened? What happened was basically, the progress of science, that the original scientists were trying to investigate the nature of God. As time progressed, basically, along came Darwin, along came the kind of, the disproving of the so-called exoteric mysteries of Catholicism and stuff, the nonsense religion. But something happened, that the baby was thrown out with the bathwater, and basically all religion was somehow banished by this kind of movement in science. Now we have the modern day militant atheists and the new atheists. Now the problem is that these essentially mystical ideas underpin ideas of human dignity. Now this is a real problem because, let me explain, this is actually a really important political problem because, a recent paper in the Humanist Journal, basically the title of the paper was, Human Dignity, the Last Bastion of Liberalism. And basically this paper surveyed 4 books that try to kind of put human dignity on kind of solid foundations using legalistic arguments, kind of philosophic arguments, kind of really, kind of like intellectual arguments to try and justify human dignity. And the reviewer came to the conclusion that it was all just, it didn't communicate outside of academia. The only purpose that these books served was to serve as criticism for other academics. So it really didn't do the job. And in the kind of preamble to the UN Declaration on Human Rights, whereas the recognition of the inherent dignity, the kind of inalienable and equal rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. When we think about it, when you take away the foundations of these values, you realize that the foundations of freedom, justice, and peace themselves don't have foundations. So we still live by these kind of like universal kind of principles. We still pay lip service to them, but then we realize they don't have foundations. And even militant atheists, even new atheists who don't believe in God, who basically hate religion, are coming to the same conclusion. Richard Dawkins recently, past few weeks, has said basically, oh no, society is going to be better with religion. Spent all his life saying, don't even let parents teach their kids religion because religion is so evil. Now he's changed his tune. He's saying basically, okay, it's a very kind of a simple way of looking at things. Basically, that religion has this idea of God looking over you, therefore we behave. And he's saying if we brought back religion, then the crime rate will plummet. That's his reasoning. But more on a kind of broader kind of way of looking at things, Douglas Murray, one of the famous new atheists, is really rejecting the whole kind of secular exercise of trying to base human dignity on kind of scientific grounds. It doesn't work. So like the militant atheists are very good at demolishing the kind of like religious fundamentalists, but they don't do very well in terms of like explaining the sanctity of human life and basically the foundations of these values. So even new atheists and militant atheists are rejecting the kind of premise that somehow we can base all these values on scientism and simple rationality. It doesn't work. What it means is that basically once you take away the foundations of these values, then the question is human dignity, why? You think about it, given the modern worldview, scientific, materialistic, nihilistic. You think progress, why? If it came from this esoteric religion, if that's gone, and human rights, why? Now the kind of, what opposes that also is once you take away those foundations, then the opposite truth, the disturbing fact is that when Ayn Rand, absolute selfishness as a virtue, her philosophy is called objectivism, absolute selfishness as a virtue. But you think about it, given these modern assumptions, then the simple question is why not? Jordan Peterson, oh, lobsters do hierarchy, therefore human beings were hierarchical. But the simple answer is why not? Unless you can actually, challenge these kind of assumptions. And, like Mike Pompeo, if you abandon the kind of foundations of universal human rights, the State Department, Mike Pompeo is saying, the Secretary of State saying, we decide who has human rights. But given the assumptions of the modern age, is that incorrect? And the sad fact of the matter is it's not. We can go further. Okay, we can go genocide. Okay, the worst atrocity, killing people is bad. Genocide. Okay, Richard Dawkins said he's a passionate anti-Darwinist. No, let me repeat that because you thought you heard me wrong. Okay. Richard Dawkins said he's a passionate anti-Darwinist when it comes to applying the ideas of Darwin to organizing our society and living our lives. But the fact of the matter is, people do organize their lives and live, organize societies according to how they understand the world. So this is exactly what happened in Nazi Germany. Basically, you had Darwin, you had social Darwinism, you had eugenics, what's called racial hygiene in Germany, theozoology. Hitler got into that, and basically it was implemented as policy. Now, the SS Einsatzgruppen death squads, they didn't think of themselves as murderers. They thought of themselves as the agents of Mother Nature. But given their Weltanschauung, given their understanding of evolution, survival of the fittest, are they incorrect? When you take away the assumptions that ground the ideas of human dignity, freedom, justice, and peace, the sad fact of the matter is, basically, their reasoning is not Do you know what I'm saying? It's not flawed based on the assumptions of the modern world. And that's the scary thing. And the funny thing is, you know, Ayn Rand followers, they're not stupid. They're not like, they're actually quite intelligent people. They reason their way that the modern kind of worldview leads to their philosophy objectively of absolute selfishness as a virtue. And the Nazis reasoned their way to genocide. But if you take away these foundations of the Enlightenment, Renaissance, you know, the whole process, then basically the sad fact of the matter is basically genocide, slavery, you know, all these kind of atrocities. The sad conclusion is basically based on the modern worldview is why not? So how do you change it? How do you oppose these ideas? Now, okay, attempts to basically cause some kind of revolution or system change that are very superficial are doomed to failure. So George Monbiot is a Guardian columnist calling for revolution to avert the catastrophe. Now he calls for basically a new narrative to oppose the neoliberal narrative. That's what he's challenging. And he's saying basically, based on scientific understanding of altruism, that we're really altruistic. Therefore, based on his new narrative to combat neoliberalism that he's working on, and based on a scientific understanding that we are really altruistic, that's the key, and also a new method of organizing ourselves, a new method of protest. And that's basically going to do the system change. But you've got to understand, basically, the science of altruism, kin selection. Okay, basically, it is that you're altruistic, the biological understanding, because you're really trying to help your own genes. You can help, you know, people of your own kin. Even if you sacrifice your own life, you're actually helping your own genes. But the mathematics of altruism, worked out by George Price, the mathematics of altruism is also the mathematics of genocide. Because by killing people who are genetically dissimilar to you, you can also help your genes propagate. So you see, unless you actually challenge the other assumptions of the current worldview, then basically any attempt to change a single idea is really doomed to failure. And it's not just changing neoliberalism or challenging Ayn Rand or challenging this part or that part. You basically have to challenge the metaphysical assumptions and cosmology of the modern world, which is nihilistic and purposeless. And that's what you need to do. If Russell Brand wants a spiritual inclusive ideology, basically if the modern worldview doesn't allow it, then basically you're really talking to a kind of small new age progressive crowd. It's not going to change the world. Do you get it? So basically it is worldview. Now, okay, to kind of something dramatic is going to happen to really revive the assumptions of the Renaissance. It is a huge happening in science, okay, that's going to totally revive the assumptions that gave rise to these notions of human dignity, equality, liberty, fraternity, meritocracy, etc. Okay, basically, this next part of the talk, okay, is a condensed 2-hour talk. I'm doing 10-15 minutes. Okay, I couldn't have done this 10 years ago. Okay, this is the simple idea. Okay, there's a progression in science. Okay, new ideas come along. And a set of ideas have come along in the past 10, 15 years, also some ideas before that, okay. Each of these ideas, I'll say what they are in a minute, each of these ideas has kind of parallel to a spiritual idea or a mystical idea, okay, a parallel. Now, the astounding thing is, these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle have come together in the past 10 years, whereby these component pieces of the jigsaw puzzle come together to form a composite picture, purely scientific ideas, to form a composite picture that is identical to the cosmology and metaphysics of the Renaissance and the Prisca Theologia and the esoteric religion. Okay, so let me explain that now. Okay, let me explain this important idea. So basically, okay, the first one is this. Basically, one of the key ideas of the Prisca Theologia is as above, so below in the esoteric religion, the so-called esoteric religion. So basically, the esoteric religion, the hidden teachings of Moses, hidden teachings of Jesus, the Batin in Islam, the hidden teachings of Hinduism, Vajrayana Buddhism, and the key ideas actually identical to the Prisca Theologia. Okay, so basically, there is an esoteric religion, which is basically the key ideas are identical to the Renaissance Prisca Theologia. And what science is doing is basically returning those key ideas for the 21st century. And one of the key ideas is microcosm is macrocosm, as above, so below. So in the Hindu, one of my favorite passages from the Upanishads, Hindu holy text, as is the human body, so is the cosmic body, as is the human mind, so is the cosmic mind. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. As is the atom, so is the universe. Now, the new idea that has kind of like really brought us back to the 21st century is fractals. Okay, fractals. What are fractals? Fractals are basically objects where the whole is reflected in the parts. You see, the entire Romanesque broccoli is repeated again in tiny little scales. You can take it to, this doesn't go to infinity, but the idea of fractals is that, you know, mathematically you define them to go to infinity. This is a kind of fractal dodecahedron. Can you see? You can zoom into like little parts of the whole. Okay, the most amazing fractal of all is the Mandelbrot set. So this is, helps to explain another mystical idea later on. Okay, the most amazing fractal of all is the Mandelbrot set. This equation, okay, it's called a recursive equation because you have to keep churning the answer backwards, round, to generate progressive sequences of results. That equation, okay, is utterly simple, but that equation contains an infinity of complexity. Now that's the entire Mandelbrot set. Okay, that's the entire Mandelbrot set. It's a 2D graph basically. But the thing is, it's infinitely varied. It's an infinity of beauty and pattern in the Mandelbrot set. So if I take that box there, I zoom in, I get that basically. If I zoom in there, you see I get that. But you see that same snowman shape is actually repeated. I zoom in there, there's that snowman shape. So you see it's fractal because that snowman shape, you know, like a meditating Buddha on the side, is repeated again and again. It's actually an infinite number of those meditating Buddhas in the Mandelbrot set. Okay, that's mathematically proven. I don't know how they did it, but it's mathematically proven. And on and on. Okay, just to reinforce the point, basically this is a fly through the Mandelbrot set, just to give you a kind of like taste. There's an infinity of beauty in the Mandelbrot set. It's astounding, isn't it? A single mathematical equation contains all that infinite beauty. It is like magic. It is like, it's been called the fingerprint of God. So basically, that is the most amazing fractal of them all. Okay. This explains another idea which is important later on. So basically, all that is contained in that equation. There's nothing random going on. It's all deterministic. All that pattern has been determined by that equation. Okay, it's recursive. So each pixel has to be kind of like repeated thousands of times to generate one pixel. Can you believe that? That is basically a universe within an equation. Okay. This will help me explain another idea. Okay, just to make time for the political stuff. This is kind of condensing a 2-hour talk in 10-15 minutes. Okay. the most kind of common fractal of all is a tree. Okay, so basically, you know, bonsai tree is like a big tree. And then even a leaf of a tree has a kind of branching pattern within the leaf. That's a fractal because self-similarity, so kind of the parts reflect the whole. Okay, so that's a tree. Now there's this idea in mystical literature of the universe as a cosmic tree. It's in Kabbalah. It's the tree of Sephiroth in Judaism. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's the Asvatha tree. It's actually a universal motif. It's everywhere. In Sufism, in the Mayan cosmology, the universe as a cosmic tree and the universe is fractal. Okay, so it's a recurring idea. Now these are simulation studies of the universe, computer simulation studies. What they found was basically this fractal structure, like a filament structure in terms of large scale structure of the universe. Now this is fractal, so this could be billions of light years in computer simulation. And you can zoom in on a bit and have the same structure. And you zoom out and have the same structure. When you take the entire universe, you have the same structure. It's fractal. So you've got a kind of juxtaposition between that and a kind of mouse neuron. So you get a kind of tree-like filament structure. Now, that's not computer simulation. That's the largest known object known to man. So that's basically the galactic supercluster called Laniakea. So our galaxy is there. It's that speck. Our galaxy is actually a speck within that tiny speck. Okay, we're not talking our sun. Our galaxy, which contains 100 billion suns, is a tiny speck in that speck. You see, and that contains 100,000 galaxies, not suns, galaxies. That's 600 million light years across. So you can see that same kind of filament branching tree structure. Now, the people who made this result from observations, astronomical observations, they think basically this is a branch of an even bigger tree. So you kind of extrapolate. So basically the universe is a giant cosmic tree. So again, the universe is fractal. So that's one way that this idea has returned for the 21st century. Now, another very important idea in religion generally, and esoteric religion, is the notion of a purposeful universe. Okay, you've got prophecies and this notion of destiny, that there's a kind of there's a kind of force that guides the destiny of the universe to a set conclusion and guides world history. Okay, that's a very kind of mystical notion, isn't it? Now, people say science kind of describes a purposeless universe. Well, not anymore. Because there's something called time-symmetric quantum mechanics. It's existed for a long time. It's been there for about 40 years. But in the past few years, the guy who formulated it, Zakir Aharonov, basically started winning awards. He won the US Medal for Science, was awarded it by Barack Obama, was nominated for the Nobel Prize. So basically, there's been weak confirmation of his theory of time-symmetric quantum mechanics. The main thing is basically what it is. Basically, quantum mechanics describes a kind of progression of, kind of Schrodinger's wave equations going forwards in time, splitting out into parallel universes, etc. Now, what this describes is basically a destiny wave function. His own words, a destiny wave function coming from the future, going backwards in time, pulling the destiny of the universe to a set conclusion. So basically, destiny wave function. Can you believe that? So that's kind of like cutting-edge 21st century science. So suddenly, ideas of providence and destiny and basically a purposeful universe don't seem so unscientific anymore. Okay, we can also take examples from the two leading contenders for grand unified theory, string theory and loop quantum gravity, who are coming to the same kind of conclusions of a kind of like a predestined convergence to a set conclusion, but we just skip that. Basically, we have enough. Basically, destiny wave functions is enough for this idea of providence and kind of like pulling to a set conclusion, or the hand of God. Now, okay, this idea, the third idea, is basically somehow reality is illusory. So this is the Buddhist Sannyata, the Hindu Maya, Plato's cave, Moby Dick, the book, which has been described as Gnostic allegory, that all visible objects are but as pasteboard masks. This notion that basically physical reality doesn't really exist. And it's an idea that's very ancient. It's basically mystical, you might say, but it's actually made a return. Elon Musk and Nick Bostrom, the philosopher, saying basically the universe is a simulation. So basically it's a computer simulation. It doesn't really exist. So basically what you see doesn't really exist. It's on a computer. So then what is real? Okay, what is real is consciousness. Okay, so basically this goes along with a theory called idealism, that basically it's consciousness that's foremost. Basically, it's first-person subjective reality is that which really exists, that the physical universe somehow is illusory. Now, an idea which has come back in the past few years has been brought back by Max Tegmark, who's an MIT physicist. And basically, he's brought back the idea of a mathematical universe. And basically, he actually quotes Pythagoras, the mystic. The universe is a number. He wrote a book called Our Mathematical Universe. What he's saying is basically the physical universe exists as a mathematical object. This is not a parallel with esoteric religion. The guy, this MIT physicist describing it, is actually quoting a mystic, Pythagoras. So it's not just, it's actually a return of an idea from ancient Greece and ancient Egypt for the 21st century. Now, if we combine the idea of an illusory universe and the physical universe as mathematical, now if you combine that with our idea, well, the discovery of the Mandelbrot set earlier, they realized that there's this ancient notion of a logos, basically, that the ideas of Pythagoras became the ideas of Platonism and Neoplatonism, found their way into the Bible as the Word. In the beginning was the Word, at the beginning of the St. John Gospel. Through the Word all things were made, without the Word nothing was made. It's really a rendering of the ancient idea that somehow the universe is this logos, this mathematical object derived from Pythagoras' idea of the universe as a number. So it's really ideas from the St. John Gospel, Neoplatonism, Platonism, Pythagoras, has been resurrected by an atheist MIT physics professor for the 21st century. And when you combine it with the Mandelbrot set, it's basically the idea that this is a very simple equation. It's the idea that there is an equation that contains not just this universe, all the complexity of this universe, like the Mandelbrot set, but all possible universes. And that's waiting to be discovered. So basically, I'll do very quickly the ultimate truth. Okay, basically, if that's a kind of survey of parallels between science and esoteric religion. Okay, these parallels I've gone through, kind of microcosm and macrocosm, kind of illusory universe, mathematical universe. allows us then to explain the foundations of human dignity as described by the Oration on Dignity of Man. Okay, so basically it's this notion, okay, let me explain it. This is the ultimate secret. In the past, people had to join secret societies for decades, pay all their dues, be told a secret maybe at the end. If you were Jewish, you weren't allowed to know the secret until you were 40, the Kabbalah. Basically, it is like the ultimate secret. And it is this. The secret is actually in religion. Is actually it's part of the kind of like a Bible and the Quran. But it's kind of it's said allegorically, and when you actually describe it literally, basically it's very heretical. It's very, very heretical. It's this basically. It's this. Basically, it's the notion that God is one. So this is the greatest commandment in Judaism, the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Central idea in Islam that God is one. Okay, so also Bhagavad Gita, the super soul, God inside you, appears divided but is never divided and is always situated as one. So universal idea. But also the idea that we are one. In the Bible, in Christ, there's no Jew, there's no Greek, there's no slave, there's no male, there's no female. For in Christ, somehow we're all one. In the Quran, many chapters begin that God created you from a single self. But there's a surah, a chapter called Luqman, which says that your creation and your resurrection is but that of a single self, not otherwise. Okay, it takes some thinking about why do we think otherwise? Creation, resurrection, we don't think otherwise. Basically, in terms of eternal life, it's saying basically when we think that the one soul has become many souls, it's saying that's not the case, that we're always one. So kind of like indirectly saying the same idea that somehow we're all one. I can go on and on of the kind of like references to scripture. The main idea is basically the oneness that God is, the oneness that you are, is somehow one and the same. So somehow God is inside you, the Christ within, the Buddha within, the Krishna within, Allah close to you, then your jugular vein. And in the Sikh holy text, the Adi Granth, the one God is all pervading and alone dwells in the mind. That's the key word, alone dwells in your mind. That somehow the oneness that God is and the oneness we are is one and the same. Of idealism. Now, okay, so how do you explain all the other consciousnesses in the universe with one consciousness? How can the one soul be undivided? How can God be inside you but undivided and always one? Okay, that's the conundrum. But if the universe is illusory, okay, like that's being returned by ideas in science and technology, ideas of an illusory universe. Okay, then how do you explain the illusion? Basically, but if the universe is a mathematical object, it means in the same way virtual reality, you take a mathematical model of Doom world or Wolfenstein world or whatever, and you can render kind of visual experiences on a computer screen. It means that basically with this logos, this kind of mathematical equation of the universe, the one consciousness can use that to render first-person subjective experience. That's me looking at you in this room now. That's you looking at me. But how can it be? But how can we all be one consciousness in God? Okay, this is the shocking explanation. Okay, this is the shocking explanation. So basically, imagine basically that the universe is fractal, and basically the ultimate fractal is the cosmic Christ, the universal Vishnu, the celestial Buddha. Okay, that the universe converges to, like, the idea that the planet will become alive and a single consciousness, and the galaxy will become conscious as well. It evolves to that state. Okay, so basically imagine that this kind of Russian doll arrangement, basically that's the cosmic Christ, universal Vishnu, etc. That might be a kind of entity whose body is many, many galaxies across, like Lanayaka. And then you have like planetary consciousnesses and planetary entities. Then you have human beings, okay, very small Russian dolls, somehow there. Okay. Now the simple idea is this. It is that once you kind of see that or have this idea that the universe is illusory and there's only one consciousness, what you can do is basically you can take all these Russian dolls that represent every single sentient being that will exist in the universe, from the beginning of the universe to the end of the universe, with the final entity of the cosmic Christ. Okay, obviously that's a simplification. Okay, that's lots of entities in the universe. It means basically that's one way of looking at things in terms of seeing many entities out there, people in this room, all the entities that would exist in the universe. But there's another way of looking at it. There's a new great chain of being. It means that basically we pass a single chain of transmigration through all these Russian dolls to the final Russian doll, the final awakening, the final cosmic Christ. It means basically in the same way that we sleep and awaken to a new day, this one consciousness you might want to call God dies and awakens to a new life. And that's called reincarnation. And that's the other universal truth in all the esoteric mysteries, the corpus mysticum, the esoteric mysteries of Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, obviously the late Taoist texts, and esoteric Christianity. So let me explain Christianity, because I'm talking in a Western nation. Basically, reincarnation was only made heresy in 553 AD in the Second Council of Constantinople. Emperor Justinian said, basically, give them one life only, because he thought they would be more obedient with one life. Even the Pope at the time, Pope Vigilius, objected because he knew it was a Roman emperor interfering in basically affairs of metaphysics and spirituality. But that thing in the Second Council of Constantinople has stuck. So basically the early Christians, I'm not saying all Christians believed in reincarnation before that, but many of the church fathers, Origen, St. Jerome, many of the leading lights of Christianity believe in reincarnation. It's a universal truth. Freemasons, Rastafarians, Zoroastrians, it's basically in the esoteric mysteries, it is reincarnation. So basically this idea of the one undivided soul, the one undivided self that God is, and reincarnation goes hand in hand. In the same way of a fractal universe, we have fractal time, the passage of the one soul through all entities in the universe, and the passage of a single life one day at a time. So in a nutshell, that explains this idea that somehow all these Russian dolls on this great chain of being can experience itself as being one with the universe. You basically hold the equation of the universe in the palm of your hand. Your physical body, bounded in this mortal physical body, in a finite life, becomes the infinite body. And that is the state of basically union with the universe or union with God. It just means in the 21st century you can talk about this idea, which is the most heretical idea in world history, in completely rational terms. And that means basically we can revive for the 21st century, we can put back in place, in completely scientific terms, the foundations for human dignity, for equality, liberty, fraternity, to revive basically the project of the Renaissance, and even present a version of God that even a militant atheist or a new atheist might not like, but can perfectly rationally understand. Once you do that, once you recognize that this common truth is behind the Prisca Theologia and all the isms of religion and all the isms of traditional religion, all the isms of modern fundamentalism, you see basically that you cover all the ideologies of this world, all the religions of this world, all the fundamentalisms of this world. You have a fulcrum now, a common core for explaining to all the different groups, the ideologies, the religions, the fanaticisms, the fundamentalisms of the world, a common root, a common fulcrum in order to initiate a global system change. So we're not just doing a system change for the products of the Enlightenment, because this common core is common to all the religions and ideologies of the world. Once you restore it for the 21st century, this is really, you see, a key to basically doing a global system change. And if back in history this was the common core, by reawakening this common core, you can converge human understanding to a common understanding in the future. So that is basically the kind of foundations of what we're going to talk about in the next part of the talk, which is actually how to do the system change. So you see a way of actually doing a global system change, because it communicates to all the people of this world. Well, what's the actual dynamics of this happening? And what does psychedelic drugs have to do with it? Okay, so we're gonna, that's a lot of information to cover. Okay, we've done a hard metaphysical stuff. It's all easy from now on, okay? So don't, okay. So take a line of Coke, buy a drink, have a cigarette, but come back, because this is the foundations of the next part of the talk, and we're going to do the psychedelic stuff and actually how to do the system change in the next part of the talk. Okay, so come back in 15 minutes and we'll continue. Okay, great. Anyway, we'll continue. Okay, we'll continue. Okay, so we're going to get into the psychedelics in a minute. So basically, we have talked about the Prisca Theologia and esoteric religion. Okay, so basically, and this kind of mystical truth, this kind of mystical view of the universe and the cosmology and metaphysics. So we've kind of covered this bit. Now, so mysticism and religious experience. I mean, there is a connection with psychedelics already, because basically psychedelics, what they do is basically, the reason why I was interested in psychedelics Okay, it was the pretty patterns. Okay, I was living in a squat in Turnpike Lane. It was amazing, pretty patterns. I remember my first trip, my legs would extend out and then suddenly shrink out, like the Wicked Witch in, Wizard of Oz. It was a fascinating feeling. My trousers rippled, and the walls became waves and the stuff. And then I progressed to psychedelic trance parties. You wouldn't believe how involved I was with the psychedelic trance scene in London in the 90s. Apart from making the damn stuff, basically, DJ bookings, played with this trance band called Cosmosis. I really, and the Cosmic Orgasms and stuff. But my main interest was and is that, especially LSD, produces these mystical experiences of being one with the universe, being one with God. And basically, it changes your life, and you just basically spend your rest of your life investigating it, trying to explain it, understand it, and communicate it. Okay. So that's the mystical part, which kind of covered in the first part of the talk. Now, we're going to do the rest of the esoteric religion and the Prisca Theologia. Okay, so there's a cosmology and there's a metaphysical understanding, which we've kind of covered. Now, the rest of it is basically, what is the process? Okay, what's the process? It's basically described in mythology. Okay, basically, mythology is, people think these are nonsense stories, but actually communicate a truth. Now, there's this guy called Joseph Campbell who had this idea of monomyth, and it's a very powerful idea because he basically discovered, or he basically explained, that all the world's myths, there's a common storyline behind all the world's myths. Okay, Quetzalcoatl, King Arthur, you name it, it's the same storyline. But he also extrapolated this idea of monomyth to the journeys and missions of Jesus, Muhammad, and Buddha. Now, you know the story of the monomyth because you know the story of Star Wars and Dune and Matrix and Lord of the Rings. It's the same basic story. Okay, so the monomyth reflects something that's happened historically all around the planet, locally, and this monomyth has been communicated in modern times. So Joseph Campbell was this great scholar of mythology who basically distilled it into this kind of storyline. Now, am I over kind of stating the connection between Star Wars and the monomyth and Joseph Campbell? Well, no, because Joseph Campbell said the monomyth needs to be communicated to each generation to keep it fresh and alive. And he said George Lucas did that. And in interviews, George Lucas said that was his intention, to communicate the monomyth and incorporate in his films religious ideas for the new generation. That was his intention. And that's what he did to communicate the monomyth, okay, for modern times. But, my life, there are these kind of like core, key experiences which changed my life, okay. Losing virginity, packing my bags and go for university. That's an amazing experience, and my first child, life-transforming experience. And the other life-transforming experience before and after was I saw Star Wars, 1978 when I was 8 years old. No, really, completely changed my life, okay. Dramatic effects. Well, anyway, so mythology is this monomyth idea. And modern myths, actually, there's a deep relationship between the modern myths and the monomyth and classical mythology. Now, what about prophecies? Now, one of the modern myths is Dune. Now, Dune, it's made into, there's a new film coming out. There's a previous film by David Lynch, there's a TV series. It's a very popular story. Basically, that's based on Muslim prophecies of the Imam Mahdi, even uses the word jihad, Iraq, etc. So it's basically taken from Muslim prophecies into a sci-fi novel. Okay, so the point here is basically, now Joseph Campbell quotes the Roman philosopher Sallustius. Now he said basically that myths are things which never happened, but they always are. So these are eternal, like a transcendent templates, they always are. But the main thing is, they always are, but they manifest in reality. So the monomyth actually happened in history, Mexico, Quetzalcoatl, Yellow Emperor, King Arthur, etc. These are historical characters who played that kind of motif, Muhammad, Buddha, etc. And so basically, the idea of prophecies is simply that the mythic archetype will eventually manifest on a global scale. So the prophecies talk about the same mythic archetype, but manifesting on the entire planet. So it's global calamity, destroyers of the planet, Book of Revelation. The word Earth used about 30 times, whole world used 4 times. So basically global events Imam Mahdi, the world Imam. So it's basically the prophecies of world religion are essentially describing the mythic archetype manifesting on a planetary scale. So that's a relationship between mythology, monomyth, modern myth like Star Wars, and prophecy. It's the same basic story. Okay, now we can use it for political ends when we discover that the most powerful revolution, we did this earlier, we did the Enlightenment revolutions, we did Marxism in Germany, but basically there's something we haven't explained yet. Basically, all these revolutions implicitly use or explicitly use the mythic prophetic archetype. So let me explain, because this is not obvious at all. Okay, so the English Revolution, all the Puritan army, the New Model Army, were basically apocalyptic Christians thinking they were hastening the coming of Christ. And that's why they fought so fervently. Marxism basically takes ideas from Hegelism, which is basically apocalyptic, is dialectic. It's basically the notion that, okay, the communist anthem, the Internationale, this is our last and final struggle, and then there will be no more struggles, and all will be peace. So Hegel took ideas from Book of Daniel, of the cycles of time, and basically the end state, or kind of like the communist state, is the return to Eden. So basically Marxism is apocalyptic. There's a key apocalyptic element to Marxism. Without it, you don't really understand what Marxism is. Now, Nazism, the same. It was an apocalyptic mass movement. Instead of class war, bourgeoisie, proletariat fighting out for this kind of paradise on earth, it was race war for a 1,000-year Reich, 1,000-year reign of Christ, straight from the Bible. You see, this apocalyptic imagery, the Weimar Republic was basically the end times. This was chaos and calamity. Along comes the Nazi Party. We're going to basically build the 1,000-year reign of not Christ of this 1,000-year Reich. And in China, okay, so the White Lotus movements, the Taiping Rebellion, they're basically apocalyptic mass movements. They use this apocalypse archetype, the mythic archetype, for political ends. And in Islam, we're talking about these Mahdiist movements. Essentially, they are basically, the Mahdi is the Messiah, they're apocalyptic mass movements. And Turkey, the Young Turks were essentially Freemasons, and the Freemason-led rebellions in America and France. Okay, there's an implicit apocalypticism in Freemasonry because there's a key idea called rebuilding the Temple of Solomon. I don't know if you're a David Icke fan, that has kind of funny connotations, but what it really means in Freemasonry, because I've got friends who are Freemasons, it means making things on earth as they are in heaven, basically building that paradise here on earth. So there's a kind of implicit apocalyptic element to Freemasonry itself. So basically, all these really powerful revolutionary movements, apart from them having worldviews, they had this mythic, apocalyptic, prophetic archetype behind them. Now, the idea is basically, once we project onto modern world affairs today, the imminent extinction, catastrophe, etc., ecological, environmental collapse, then that's far more closer to the prophecies than the Weimar Republic or the state of the world in English Revolution, etc. What I'm saying is basically the state of the world today is ripe for a 21st century apocalyptic mass movement. Okay, so basically we use the mythic prophetic archetype. We're basically saying that reality is mythology. The mythic archetype is manifesting today on the planet. The prophecies of the world, religion, are manifesting on the planet today. And you can use that for political ends, because historically they're always used for political ends to power these movements, which really shook the status quo in a very powerful way. Now, this is a very dangerous energy, I know, to control. But we're talking about global system change. You need something powerful behind it to do it, to make it succeed. Now, how do you control it? Okay, there's lots to actually work through. How do you stop it from becoming evil? Okay, we need to get through this because it's really important. Okay, look. Okay, when we unleash this power, how do you really control it? I mean, you see the kind of riots in Hong Kong. You know, that's kind of revolution gone crazy. Violent revolution. The revolutionaries not discerning the violence. So it's kind of how do you do a peaceful revolution? That's the key, isn't it? Really. I mean, okay. So really, I meet Hong Kong people now. I think to myself, don't beat me up. And when I say, I was born in Hong Kong, I kind of think in my head, I'm safe. I'm not going to beat you up. There is. You probably don't hear it on the news. I mean, the violence is kind of played down in mainstream media, but you see the clips on YouTube. It's quite strange. Anyway, we want a peaceful revolution. That's the main point here. Okay, so okay. Now, if we project the myths and the prophecies onto modern times, okay, what is the dynamic that manifests the future? Now, okay, how do you predict the future? The best way to predict the future is to create it. Quotes from Abraham Lincoln, also attributed to Peter Drucker. Okay, so basically, there's another idea behind esoteric mysteries and the Prisca theologia, which I'm going to explain now from the Renaissance. It's magic. I know it sounds really namby-pamby, doesn't it? How do we do the system change? We need some magic. Okay, let me explain. There was a meaning to magic. There was meaning to the word magus and magi. So magi, the wise men who saw Jesus as a baby. Okay, that's the myth. Okay. Who were the magi? What is magic? What is the magus? Let me explain. There's actually something behind it which is very real and powerful. Let me explain what it is. So witches, wizards, and warlocks are practitioners of magic. So getting a bit Harry Potter now, aren't we? So there's kind of modern form which is slightly debased and kind of like, abracadabra and white bunny comes out and stuff, magic kind of thing. But there's a historical meaning to what magic was about. Let me explain it. It's really powerful. What magic is, okay. The magus, the Renaissance magus, it's basically the idea that something in your mind manifests in reality. So let me give you a simple example. Okay, I want to manifest an ice cream. Okay, now I'm sitting in my house. In order to manifest that ice cream, I need to keep that goal in my mind. Now it sounds really facetious. I know, really trivial. Now I go to the shop. I need to keep the goal in my mind. And if I forget that goal, I come back to my house. Oh, there's no ice cream. Okay, utterly simple. But also manifest the ice cream. I need to keep that goal in mind. And I keep that goal, I go to ice cream, manifested it. You take that same idea to manifesting a cathedral. So Christopher Wren, original Freemason, basically you try and manifest a cathedral. That's magic. You've got a plan. You need to learn the laws of physics and architecture to manifest a cathedral. You want to manifest your life. Okay, find your perfect partner. Get a good job. That's magic. Okay, so if you want to manifest a new world order, that's magic. If you want to manifest a global system change, you've got something in your mind, a plan, a worldview, an idea, an ideology. You want to manifest it in physical reality. That's magic. That is the nature of magic. But isn't that utterly simple and mundane? So what's so mysterious about that? Well, isn't that so commonplace? Well, there's something extra. There's something extra to do with this magic thing. The idea of magic really continued in the kind of popular culture. So there's this thing called New Thought. That actually started in America, 19th century. New Thought was a movement that really was the manifestation of this idea of magic for the 19th and 20th centuries. It's quite influential movement. So things like law of attraction, all these kind of ideas really derived from New Thought. Now, there's a very famous teacher of New Thought, okay, and his name was Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. He wrote one of the most famous self-help books of all time. It's called The Power of Positive Thinking. He was actually a master Freemason. Now, the declaration of the International Society for New Thought, basically the 1957 declaration, had in its kind of manifesto the quote, the inseparableness of God and man. So there's this very mystical idea behind New Thought. Okay, the movement in America. And Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, master Freemason, one of the most famous self-help proponents of all time. He had a church in New York City in the 50s and 60s. Basically, he was a pastor. Okay, he wrote self-help books and he gave sermons. Now, there was a family living close by, and they brought their kids to hear his sermons every Sunday. There was a little boy who heard his sermons. He was absolutely rapt, he really liked them. Basically, he was captivated. Okay. Later on in his life, this little boy, teenage boy, would later reflect back on Dr. Norman Vincent Peale's sermons. He said they went for hours, but he didn't want them to end. When they finished, he wanted them to go on. He said he was such a powerful, amazing speaker. He was totally inspired by his ideas. Now, that little boy's name, growing up in New York City, his name was Donald Trump. So in terms of using magic, manifestation, the power of positive thinking for political ends, it works. It works, basically. I mean, you can all list the faults of Donald Trump. I know that's another 2-hour talk, but I mean, no one's completely bad or evil. I mean, basically, he has some good points, I think, maybe. Anyway, okay, there's basically the power of positive thinking. It works, and this is new thought, and this is magic manifested in the modern world. In a new age, you have this idea of law of attraction. Okay, I used to work in St James's Church, Piccadilly in London. Basically, it was real kind of like a commercial new age, like sell zone, basically. Now, law of attraction was sold in such a way, basically, that you focus on checks coming through the post, and checks will come through the post. You focus on BMW, that Porsche, and yeah, you'll get that Porsche and BMW. I thought it was a bit of a con, really, quite frankly. But there is a mystical dimension to new thought. There's a mystical dimension to this idea of magic. And it's this. Okay, I'll tell you what it is. Basically, the universe needs things to happen. Now, if you believe that there's a destiny wave function propelling the universe to a set conclusion, there is also an historical destiny wave function propelling human fate and world history to a set conclusion. Now, if your will has become aligned to the will of the universe, then the universe will conspire to make things happen around you to realize your goals. It doesn't mean you're going to visualize winning the lottery tomorrow, you're going to win the lottery. It doesn't mean you get your Porsche or you get your checks coming through the post like the kind of law of attraction teachers tell you. It just means basically that if your goals are aligned with the goals of the universe, then the destiny wave function will make things happen around you in order to conspire to make your goals happen. And that involves basically noticing that the dice are loaded. It means synchronicities. It means funny coincidences that are not coincident. Basically, things happen around you to realize your destiny because your destiny has become aligned to the destiny, the historical destiny, and the destiny of the universe and the destiny of humankind. It means basically if your goals become aligned with that of the universe, you have become one with the destiny wave function. You've become one with the force. You've become one with the Tao. It means that this idea of providence, the hand of providence being gripped by the hand of fate, suddenly has a perfectly scientific explanation to it. Now, for political ends, if you can persuade enough people with this worldview to manifest this global system change in a language that communicates to all the isms of this world, the ideologies and religions of this world. So you're communicating a worldview where basically people become gripped by the hand of fate. You're telling them basically this is the destiny wave function and your revolution, your global system change is bound to succeed. Okay, so what you're saying, but isn't that you just persuading people that they're going to succeed and you're just doing a kind of a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy? But well, no, if you believe that the mythic archetype is real, that it manifests on this planet and it's manifesting now, then this notion basically, instead of manifesting a cathedral or becoming a US president or manifesting a Porsche or whatever, what you collectively manifest as a kind of movement is basically you're manifesting the global system change. You're manifesting the realization of the prophecies. You're manifesting the completion of the mythic archetype and the restoration of Camelot. So that's powerful, isn't it? So it's like Donald Trump positive thinking magnified 1 billion-fold, 2 billion-fold, 7 billion-fold. So that's powerful. Okay. Now we have the question of how do we stop this stuff becoming evil? Okay, so we've kind of basically run into really serious political questions now, really deep political. I think these are the deepest questions in political philosophy. But then, look, we talk about Hitler, we talk about Marx, okay, and tyranny. But who gets to play the magus? Now, in Oration on Dignity of Man, basically, he's saying, basically, Pico della Mirandola, that the magus, magic, is basically the process of basically implementing the cosmic commonwealth in order to kind of organize the human commonwealth, i.e. politics and economics and society. But who gets to play magus? The key passage, the key idea in the Plato's Republic is the philosopher king. Now, the philosopher king leaves the cave of illusions, Plato's cave, leaves the illusion of reality, experiences directly the good. The philosopher king comes back into the cave, but then the philosopher king has to lead society towards the good. Again, this idea of progress, a progression towards some goal, some kind of positive thinking goal, the good. But then who gets to play philosopher king? And this kind of runs up against another question, the separation of church and state, which I totally agree with. Okay, that sounds like a conundrum, doesn't it? So how, you're saying you use these religious ideas for politics, but then you're saying there should be a separation of church and state. But how do you get around that? Now, the reason why there should be a separation of church and state, it comes from Thomas Jefferson, the third US president, is associated with the phrase. But it's very derived from the writings of John Locke, the great English political philosopher. And basically, in his writings, he basically said there should be a separation between church and state because to stop religious fanaticism, kind of like taking over politics, and also stop people from saying that their personal viewpoints is backed up by God. I believe this to be true. We should organize society like this because it's my interpretation of the Bible, and it can't be changed. This is the way society should be because God told me so. Let's stop that, basically. So it's a very valid point of John Locke and Thomas Jefferson. It's not just about the English Anglo-Saxon philosophers and politicians, because in Shia Islam, the Shiites, there's a strict separation of church and state for 1,300 years. That was changed in 1979 by Ayatollah Khomeini. So it's a recurring issue in Islam. It's a recurring issue. And it's right. I think it's right. But then how can you say that's right and then propose all these mystical religious ideas for use in politics? Okay, I'll explain how you do it. Okay, the third part of this puzzle is negative freedom versus positive freedom. Now, this is slightly intellectual, but it needs explaining because it's a really important kind of conundrum of the modern age. What is positive freedom and what is negative freedom? Basically, negative freedom is basically freedom from constraint and freedom from coercion. So that's the version of freedom that we have in the West. Now, basically, positive freedom is the freedom to do something, is the freedom to realize some goal in the future, some ideology, some idea of utopia. Now, the trouble with positive freedom, the philosopher Isaiah Berlin said that positive freedom will always lead to tyranny. And he's partly right. But how do you avoid positive freedom leading to tyranny? When you set this amazing goal and you want all the people to realize that goal, how do you stop it from becoming tyrannical? Okay, the answer is this. The solution to these conundrums is this. Basically, okay, how you do it is basically in the same way I explained that there's a way of looking at science that's just purely scientific, ideas that are purely scientific, separate from religion and mysticism, and that you can, form these pieces together purely separate from religion and mysticism in a way that perfectly corresponds to the mystical kind of religious picture, but it doesn't have to have anything to do with religion. In the same way, in a sense, there's a complete separation. In the same way, you can do it with politics. If you can articulate the political philosophy in a way that's completely separate from religious ideas, and it makes sense to secular people, to militant atheists, to new atheists, to perfectly secular humanists, etc. If it makes perfect sense, separate from religion, then basically you've separated church and state. But if those political ideas have their perfect correspondence with religious ideas, then you've also brought back the religious ideas. Okay, so that's how I believe you separate church and state. Now, how do you do positive freedom that doesn't infringe on people's negative freedom, i.e. to be free of constraint and coercion? It's basically by communicating the worldview. If the positive vision of the future is contained in that worldview, and that worldview communicates perfectly rationally to secular people and religious people, then basically the positive aspect is not through coercion, it's through the assimilation of the worldview. So basically there's no tyrant coercing people to manifest that future because it's contained in the worldview, and it's kind of like, instead of manufactured consent, it is informed consent. So basically you still have freedom from coercion and freedom from constraint. We still consume, you're still Western liberal Democrats. But you have this kind of like common goal that has been communicated in the worldview that people express of their own free will. Then who gets to play magus or philosopher king? It's basically the social movement or the group of individuals that can communicate this worldview that satisfies this criteria. Then that is the de facto answer to global system change. So it's not someone claiming to have the truth has to pass the test. And that's the answer to the conundrum. And other issues of modern politics, the rest of it, I mean, what are these issues? I mean, most pub debates, is it capitalism, is it capitalism or is it socialism? Is it internationalism or is it nationalism? That's the whole Brexit thing, isn't it? Again, that's what we just discussed, technological and environmental. Well, there's another idea in all religion, basically, and Greek philosophy, is the idea of the golden mean. And this idea, I think, is completely reasonable. It's simple, it's utterly simple. It's the notion that basically virtue is the mean between two extremes. So basically, courage, too much courage is recklessness, too little courage is cowardice. Aristotle, okay. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? But at the same time, you have to fluctuate between the mean. If your house is burning down, then jump out the window because you're about to get burned to death. Be reckless, If you've got a man-eating tiger hungry in front of you, there's no point in being brave, just run. So you've got to fluctuate between the mean sometimes, but you maintain the middle. In politics, what it means is not left-wing or right-wing, progressive or conservative. It's when you apply the golden mean, it is both. So utterly simple. If you want to have a movement that's going to unify not just the ideologies and isms of this world and all the religions and fundamentalisms of this world, you need to reconcile these divisions. So in a sense, both are right, but you have to observe the mean, and if things fluctuate too far, you need to take it back. So one application of this idea that the USA has been in a war state since World War II. The US economy has not left being a war economy since World War II. So it's basically gone to one extreme, but we need to bring it back. So basically, the simple idea is that we are living in a world of extremism. Basically, things have gone to the extremes. The revolution I have in mind is simply bringing things back to the medium, to the middle. It's simple as that. In a world where your Conservative Party, the kind of bastion of conservatism and kind of like moderation, has become a kind of like hotbed of fanatics and extremists. So things have really gone to the extreme. And so for what I'm proposing, we simply, to use an expression from Star Wars, we restore balance to the Force. As simple as that. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? If you want a unifying movement, that's what you have to do. It's not left-wing or right-wing, capitalism or socialism. It's a no-brainer. You have to reconcile these divisions. Okay, there's other things you can talk about. There's basically, other things you can talk about. You can basically, the political program, things like what are the issues of the world, things like, the Green New Deal. There's all things, the worldview, like, new forms of economics, kind of non-linear dynamics, complexity theory, economics and political science, etc. It's a worldview. I can't cover the entire worldview in a short talk. But you get the gist. Basically, you have basically this kind of revival of the esoteric religion, and basically this basic ideas, the most important ideas kind of political philosophy kind of fleshed out. But what you also need, you need your utopian vision. So what is it? What is your utopian vision? It's not just about, look, these are the problems of the world, we need to solve them. It's not like the social movement or the rebels that need to basically, okay, things are really bad, things are really horrible and bad, but we're going to blood, sweat and tears sacrifice to make things less horrible. Okay, no, you have to solve the problems of the world. You have to give people a utopian vision, something to work towards that's really positive and inspiring. So what is that? Well, basically, it is technological and it's ecological. Now, in kind of mystical terms, in kind of mythic terms, you kind of lay it on thick. It's restoring the Garden of Eden. It's basically taking humankind back to the condition before the fall. It's basically Kitral Yuga, the age of purity and light. It is a new heaven and a new earth. You get it? It's healing the schism of Babel. It's bringing humankind together. That's the mythic religious interpretation. But in real terms, it's basically, if you want to restore Eden, it's the greening of the planet. It's basically turning the Sahara back into pasture and forest. It's basically, what people know to be necessary in any case, anyway, to basically take all the CO2 back into the planet. But you put political will behind it. It's literally recreating in terms of replanting the kind of ecosystems of this planet, which is really important. And the other thing is technology. Okay, basically, it's not eco versus technology. It's basically, you need both. On a very simple level, okay, it's astounding. This year, basically, solar power has achieved parity with coal for the first time this year. Amazing. Little things like, another 3 billion people on this planet, how are you going to feed them all? Well, a simple fact of the matter is, in India, 1/3 of all the food rots in transit. And in the West, slightly less rots in transit, but even more just gets thrown out your fridge. You just get wasted. So things like smart cities, smart grids, simple self-driving cars. Suddenly, all this parking space, all this hunks of metal just sitting there doing nothing. You know what I'm saying? There are technological fixes which are really important in terms of healing the schism of Babel, this translation kind of AI software. So there's loads of technological fixes which need kind of political will behind it. This is the Green New Deal on a global scale times several billion. That's what we're trying to do. But there's something else on the horizon, and this is huge. This is so huge. Okay, this is so massive, and it's basically the technological singularity. And the technological singularity is so profound that basically even secular people talk about it in completely kind of religious terms. It's called apocalypse for nerds, rapture for geeks. Stephen Hawking, the late great Stephen Hawking, calls it the biggest event in human history. But isn't that what the prophecies are about? A complete physical transformation of the planet and beyond. So basically, this technological singularity is a physical transformation of the planet that's so profound with the advent of artificial intelligence, and basically the technology goes off the scale. So basically, this is the utopian vision, which is in Silicon Valley already, but when you couple this technological vision with the values of the Enlightenment, this is really the key, and the eco side of things, to this utopian vision for the future. But to finish off, okay, last but not least, because I know a lot of you come here just for the psychedelics. No, I'm joking. Okay, so what does psychedelics have to do with it? Absolutely everything. I'll tell you why. Absolutely everything. Because we talked about earlier the mystical and religious experience. Now, in world religion, basically, psychedelics permeates world religion. Now Buddha, okay, this is relating psychedelics now to the current conclusion of the global system change. Now Buddha, before he had his final enlightenment, okay, meditated under the Bodhi tree for a long time. And basically the official story, this is not controversial, the official story is a young girl gave him a white milky drink. He drank it, and shortly after he had his enlightenment. Now what it was, okay, any psychedelic people here go off to India, it's obvious. Okay, white milky substance, it's called bang, it contains cannabis. And you drink it, you're going to have possibly a mystical experience. So literally, bang, triggered by psychedelics. Now, manna in the Bible, the Israelites ate the manna, they felt the presence of Yahweh. Psychedelics, white like coriander seed, was baked into wafers and tasted of honey. Okay, and Bhagavad Gita, the kind of soma drinkers, okay, psychedelic, taste the delights of heaven, but then they come back. Now the soma means to press out and extract. And there's ancient Sanskrit texts which talk about the lotus plant, which is a psychedelic. They describe it as soma. So at some point they were pressing out and extracting from the lotus plant, drinking it, and tripping out, having psychedelic experiences. A kind of a hadith from Islam, okay, this is agreed by all Muslims, Sunnis, Shiites. It's basically a safe hadith that everyone agrees is the case. It goes, the Prophet of Allah said to us, come to us to the house of Aisha, okay, his favorite wife. And Aisha said to us, Muhammad said to Aisha, bring us hashisha. Aisha brought us hashish, and we ate. And that's the one reason why in Muslim countries, if you get caught with cannabis, you probably get off. Okay, that one hadith. Okay, it just means if you eat hashish, that's one way to trip out, basically. So all these religions basically involve psychedelic drugs. Now, what about mythology? We talked about mythology early on. And so, okay, Bhagavad Gita is part of a bigger mythological work called the Mahabharata. So that's mythology. So Soma drinkers is a part of myth. Now, Lotus, back to Lotus again. The classic of classics, Odysseus. What's the first island of call? It's the Lotus Eaters. Again, a reference to psychedelic drugs. Now, the oldest myth of all, Gilgamesh, the plant of immortality at the bottom of the ocean. So you see, psychedelics in religion, psychedelics in mythology. Okay, back to now. What about psychedelics for the present? Okay, so in prophecies, we're saying the prophecies are now, then what does psychedelics have to do with it? Well, in the Zoroastrian prophecies, Okay, Zoroastrianism is a very influential religion. I mean, Judaism borrowed a lot from it. Basically, there's a prophecy about the Saoshyant. The Saoshyant, the world benefactor, world renovator, is the Zoroastrian Messiah. You know, probably the most famous Zoroastrian the most famous Zoroastrian ever, more famous than Zoroaster, is actually Freddie Mercury. Okay, little factoid there. Okay, but anyway, in the Zoroastrian prophecies, it talks about the Saoshyant, the Messiah, prepares the Huoma, the Zoroastrian psychedelic sacrament, in the fat of an ox. And that's a prophecy for the future, which we think is now. Now, fat of an ox, what does that imply? What does that kind of mean? It means fat, soluble, alkaloid psychedelic, doesn't it? That, you know, you cook hashish into full fat milk, it doesn't work in skim milk, and various other things like fly agaric, okay? Not that I do that kind of stuff, obviously. Camera's rolling. I don't do that kind of stuff at all. I mean, just things you hear about. Okay. Anyway, look. So prophecies. Okay, prophecies and Zoroastrianism. Okay, now the Bible. Okay, here's where the Bible. Here's where we connect the prophecies to the current and what's happening in the West now and today. There's a prophecy in the Book of Revelation. It says basically, "To him that overcometh, I will give to him dominion over all the nations. And to him that overcometh, I will give to him a portion of the hidden manna." Hidden manna, the psychedelic sacrament. Now, why was the manna hidden? Well, the manna is hidden because the manna was kept in the Ark of the Covenant. That's in the book of Hebrews in the Bible, New Testament. Why it was hidden was because the prophet Jeremiah, when the Babylonians invaded in 586 AD, the prophet Jeremiah hid the Ark of the Covenant. It's never been found. So that's why the manna is hidden, okay? You know, the historian Dan Merker wrote a book called The Mystery of Manna. In the book, he basically proposes that the manna was actually using, it's not totally convincing, but it's plausible that the manna was actually ergot, a fungus, psychedelic fungus. Now, the interesting thing is, prophecies, Book of Revelation, the return of the manna, hidden manna, is that LSD, discovered in 1945, was first synthesized from ergot. So that'd be an interesting, kind of like fulfilling a prophecy. It doesn't matter if it was ergot. The main thing is basically in the 60s and 70s, there was a resurgence of psychedelic drugs, basically, through LSD mainly. And really, Gail Bradbrook, so many modern day revolutionaries and basically people thinking of these along these lines. A guy I'm working with, Daniel Pinchbeck, my own history, basically, there's a psychedelic component. If the Prisca Theologia, if the esoteric religion was so lost, suppressed by the Catholic Church and by modern science, it took something like LSD to basically bring it back. So full circle, it means basically the ancient mysteries and psychedelic drugs, that psychedelics are really the key. I wouldn't be standing here today if the 60s revolution didn't happen. So basically, Extinction Rebellion wouldn't exist if Gail Bradbrook didn't go off and had a ibogaine ayahuasca experience. And you see the same story again and again. People I meet basically had these experiences in the late 60s, 70s, and more recently, the recent resurgence. And I think this is the kind of like vanguard for the resurgence of the Prisca Theologia. So this is really the kindling for the spark and the first torches to take the flame. But obviously, the global system change isn't just going to be psychedelic people. But this is how it starts. And when we go to Silicon Valley, we realize that Steve Jobs, it's not just Steve Jobs, the whole homebrew thing, the whole Silicon Valley thing was kind of LSD fueled from the late 60s and 70s. So it means that's a psychedelic involvement in basically world religion, mysticism, prophecies, and it's not superficial, it's very, very deep. So it means the kind of biggest event in human history, the technological singularity and this global system change, would have been to a great extent kind of like inspired by psychedelic drugs. Now where is all this going to happen? Okay, where's this great revolution, global system change, creation of AI and technological singularity? Where's it going to happen? And I believe basically it's going to happen in England. Now, okay, I'll tell you, England's only William Blake has been called England's only prophet. Now, really, his works were prophetic. He was talking about the future. So when you sing Jerusalem, you think you're singing about the past. No, it's about the future. When you read his works, like one of his poems, beginning with the poem, okay, the fields from Islington to Marylebone, Primrose Hill to St. John's Wood were builded over with pillars of gold, and there Jerusalem's pillars stood. Like many people in his time, he thought the great happening would happen in London and Bristol. I'll tell you what, it really is going to happen in Bristol as well. Because basically, in terms of revolutions and global system change, I think there's something about the West Country, something about Stroud and Bristol that's kind of conducive to, like in fact I got unknown speaker talking about revolutionary movements. I got a crowd of people, really listening about any heckling at all, and no Marxists and no neo-Nazis kind of trying to disrupt the talk. It just okay, jokes aside, it just means that basically this is a hotbed of revolutionary global change activity. We also recognize that basically the world's top artificial intelligence chip company is based in Bristol. It's called GraphCore. Okay, so you see, in terms of the creation of artificial intelligence and the global system change, it's going to be London and Bristol, I think, and the M4 Tech Corridor. So there you have it. I think this global system change will involve the revival of this Prisca theologia. It's going to involve the creation of true artificial intelligence. It's going to involve this new worldview, basically, that needs to be communicated, that can be communicated to all different ideologies and religions. And I think it's going to start in London and the kind of England, Bristol included. So the advent of AI, technological singularity, the global system change, fulfilling of the prophecies, the kind of fulfilling of human destiny, the return to Eden, the kind of restoring of Camelot, is going to happen very soon. It's going to be people like you and me. So all this and so much more is coming soon to a planet near you. Thanks very much.